The encounter the cantina fell silent as Vextal raised his gnarled hand, the old Kethver's eyes distant with memory. His companions leaned forward, their scaled faces reflecting the dim light of the establishment. For cycles, they had begged him to tell this story, the one that changed everything he believed about the galaxy. You want to know about humans? Vextal's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. Then listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will haunt your dreams. I met a human once, and by the void, I pray you never meet. 1. The younger Kethver exchanged glances. They had heard whispers about these strange bipedal creatures from the distant spiral arm, but most dismissed them as rumors, weak, soft-skinned beings with no natural weapons, no enhanced senses, no obvious evolutionary advantages. What could possibly be frightening about creatures so poorly designed? Vextal took a long drink from his chalice, his throat working as he swallowed the bitter liquid. It was 17 cycles ago, when I was still supervising the mining operation. On Kethver, Station 7, we were extracting rare minerals from the asteroid belt. Dangerous work that required precision and strength. Our crews were the best in the sector, seasoned workers who had survived countless hazards. His claws tapped against the table's surface, creating a rhythmic pattern that seemed to echo his memories. That's when the transport arrived. A prison. Ship carrying criminals and political dissidents to be processed for the labor camps. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. But among the cargo was something I'd never seen before. The cantina owner, a portly Kethver named Gresh, moved closer, pretending to clean glasses while listening intently. Even he had never heard this tale in its entirety. The humans, Vextal continued, were pathetic at first glance, smaller than us, no natural armor, no claws or fangs. Their skin was soft, their bodies seemingly fragile. The guards laughed as they herded them into the holding cells. We all did. How could such weak creatures survive in the harsh conditions of deep space mining? One of the younger listeners, Zakma, couldn't contain his skepticism. Elder Vextal, surely you exaggerate. If they were so weak, what made them dangerous? Vextal's eyes fixed on the young Kethver, with an intensity that made him shrink back. Patience, youngling. You will understand soon enough. The old supervisor's memory drifted back to that fateful day. The station had been operating at full capacity, its massive extractors pulling precious metals from the asteroid field. The human prisoners had been assigned to the lowest tier jobs, hauling debris and performing basic maintenance. Most of the crew ignored them, considering them beneath notice. There was one human in particular, Vextal recalled, a male named Marcus Chen. He was quiet, observant, different from the others. While his fellow prisoners complained about their conditions, he studied everything around him. The machinery, the station layout, the work routines. I thought he was simply trying to find ways to make his labor easier. The story paused as Vextal's expression grew darker. Then came the accident. A massive power surge in the main reactor, caused by a micrometeorite impact that damaged the primary cooling system. The entire station was in danger of a catastrophic meltdown. Our best engineers worked frantically, but the damage was too severe. We had maybe 6 hours before the reactor went critical. The cantina patrons held their breath, knowing this was where the tale would take its turn. That's when the humans spoke up. Marcus Chen, this supposedly insignificant prisoner, approached our chief engineer and offered to help. Can you imagine? A primitive alien offering to solve a problem that our greatest minds couldn't fix. The engineer laughed at him, told him, to return to his cell and await death like the rest of us. Vexthal's voice grew quieter, more intense. But Marcus didn't give up. He explained that he had been studying our systems, that he understood the problem better than we realized. He drew diagrams in the dirt, showing modifications that could bypass the damaged sections. The engineer was skeptical, but with death approaching, he had little choice but to listen. The old HFY's claws scraped against the table as he continued. What happened next defied everything we thought we knew about these creatures. Marcus worked for 18 straight hours, his soft hands bleeding from handling rough metal, his weak body pushed far beyond what should have been possible. But he never stopped, never complained, never gave up. Gresh set down his glass, completely, absorbed in the story. Did he fix it? More than that, Vextal replied. He improved it. The modifications he made not only prevented the meltdown, but increased the reactor's efficiency by 30%. Our engineers spent days studying his work, trying to understand how a primitive alien could see solutions they had missed. The younger HFY looked confused. But that's just intelligence, Elder. Surely that's not what makes them dangerous. Vextal's laugh was bitter. Intelligence, you think that's all it was? No, youngling. What made Marcus dangerous wasn't his mind, though that was formidable. It was something else, something we didn't recognize until it was too late. The story continued, painting a picture of the days that followed. Marcus had gained respect among both the prisoners and some of the guards. His quiet leadership began to change the dynamic of the station. Other humans looked to him for guidance, and even some of the alien prisoners began to listen when he spoke. The human had a way of inspiring others, Vextal explained. Not through threats or domination, but through example. He worked harder than anyone else, shared his food with the weak, and never abandoned hope even in the darkest moments. It was ... unsettling. The station's routine had been disrupted in ways that went beyond the reactor repairs. Productivity among the prisoners increased, but so did their confidence. They began to organize, to cooperate in ways that made their guards nervous. I should have seen the signs, Vextal admitted. The way the humans studied our security protocols, how he memorized guard rotations, the subtle way he tested our responses to different situations. He was gathering intelligence, preparing for something. The tension in the cantina was palpable as the story reached its climax. Vextal described how the station's sensors had detected a massive asteroid on a collision course with their facility. The object was too large to destroy with their weapons, too fast to avoid with their limited maneuvering thrusters. Our calculations showed impact in less than 4 hours, Vextal said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The station's shields couldn't withstand the collision. We began evacuation procedures, but the transport ships couldn't carry everyone. Someone would have to stay behind. The old HFY's eyes grew distant, reliving the moment that changed everything. That's when Marcus Chen stepped forward with a plan so insane, so impossible, that it could only have come from a human mind. He wanted to use the mining explosives to fracture the asteroid, but it would require someone to plant the charges. Manually, flying a maintenance pod directly into the path of destruction. Silence filled the cantina as the implications sank in. Such a mission would be suicide, even for a skilled pilot with proper equipment. The human volunteered continued, not just volunteered, but insisted. He had studied the asteroid's composition, calculated the exact placement needed for the charges, and figured out a flight path that might, just might, allow for survival. When our pilots refused to attempt such madness, Marcus simply said he would do it himself. The younger Kethver leaned forward, his skepticism replaced by fascination. But how could he pilot our ships? Surely the controls were designed for Kethver physiology. That's what we thought, Vextel replied. But Marcus had been watching, learning, adapting. He had figured out how to operate our technology despite his alien physiology. We had underestimated not just his intelligence, but his incredible adaptability. The story paused as Vextel gathered his thoughts, preparing for the most difficult part of his tale. As Marcus prepared for his suicide mission, something extraordinary happened. The other prisoners, human and alien alike, began to volunteer to help. Not because they were forced to, but because this one human had inspired them to believe in something greater than their own survival. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. The cantina fell silent except for the soft hum of the environmental systems. Everyone present understood that they were hearing something that would change their perspective forever. The human climbed into that maintenance pod. Vextel concluded the first part of his story and flew straight into the jaws of death. But what happened next, what I witnessed in those final moments before impact, will haunt me until the day I die, because I learned something about humans that night, something that should terrify every thinking being in this galaxy. He stood slowly, his old joints creaking with emotion. Come back tomorrow, and I'll tell you the rest. But remember this. Warning, if you ever encounter a human, if you ever see that look in their eyes that says they've decided to do something, run. Run as fast as you can, because nothing in this universe can stop a human who has made up their mind. The lesson the next evening, the cantina was packed. Word had spread throughout the station about Vextel's story, and Kethver, from every level of the facility, had come to hear the conclusion. The old supervisor sat in the same chair, his expression grim as he faced the expectant crowd. You came back, he observed, his voice carrying a note of regret. I had hoped some of you might have the sense to stay away, to remain ignorant of what I'm about to tell you. But I can see the hunger in your eyes, the need to know. Very well, but remember, I warned you. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the assembly. When I left you last night, Marcus Chen was flying directly into the path of a massive asteroid, carrying enough explosives to theoretically fracture the object, but requiring precision that bordered on the impossible. The human had volunteered for this suicide mission, and somehow, impossibly, he had inspired others to believe in his plan. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. What I didn't tell you, Vextel continued, was that Marcus wasn't flying alone. 3 other prisoners, 2 humans and a Veltar, had insisted on joining him. They had rigged additional maintenance pods with makeshift explosive devices, creating a coordinated strike that multiplied their chances of success. Gresh, who had closed his establishment to everyone except those listening to the story, couldn't help but interrupt. But Elder, surely the pods weren't designed for such maneuvers. The gravitational forces alone would have crushed them. Exactly, Vextel nodded grimly. Any rational being would have recognized the impossibility of the task. The pods were designed for slow, careful work in controlled environments. Taking them into the chaotic gravitational field of a massive asteroid at high velocity was beyond insane. The old Kethver's claws scraped against his chalice as he lifted it to his lips. But humans, I learned, don't think like rational beings. They see impossibility as a challenge to overcome, not a barrier to accept. Marcus and his companions flew those pods like they were built for aerial combat, compensating for gravitational anomalies through pure instinct and reflexes. The story continued, painting a picture of the desperate flight toward the asteroid. The station's sensors tracked the small pods as they weaved through the debris field, their occupants pushing the fragile craft to their absolute limits. I watched from the command center, Vextal recalled, his voice distant with memory. Our best pilots stood beside me, their faces pale with disbelief. They were witnessing flying that should have been impossible, maneuvers that defied their understanding of physics and biology. The humans were pulling gravitational forces that should have rendered them unconscious, yet they continued to respond with perfect precision. The crowd stirred uneasily, beginning to understand the implications of what they were hearing. But the truly terrifying part, Vextal continued, was the communication between the pods. Marcus wasn't just leading the mission, he was coordinating it in real time, calculating trajectories and timing with mathematical precision while under extreme physical stress. His brain was functioning at levels that our scientists claimed were impossible for any organic being. The story reached its climax as the pods approached their target. The asteroid loomed before them, a mountain of rock and metal that dwarfed their tiny craft. The explosive charges had to be placed at precise points, calculated to create fractures that would split the object into harmless fragments. The first pod, piloted by the Veltar, reached its target point but was crushed by gravitational forces before it could detonate its charges, Vextal explained. The second pod, one of the humans, managed to place its explosives but was destroyed in the process. That left Marcus and one other human to complete the mission. The tension in the cantina was suffocating. Everyone present could visualize the scene, two fragile pods against a mountain of death with an entire space station depending on their success. That's when Marcus did something that still haunts my dreams, Vextal whispered. He deliberately crashed his pod into the asteroid's surface, using the impact to drive the explosive charges deep into a critical stress point. The explosion should have vaporized him instantly, but somehow impossibly. He had calculated the exact angle and velocity needed to create a protective pocket in the rock. The old Kethver's voice broke slightly as he continued. The human survived. Not only survived, but remained conscious and functional, while the asteroid cracked and shattered around him. Marcus Chen was still transmitting targeting data to the final pod, guiding his companion to the last critical detonation point. The crowd sat in stunned silence, struggling to process the implications of what they were hearing. The mission succeeded, Vextal concluded. The asteroid was destroyed, the station was saved, and Marcus Chen was rescued from the wreckage with injuries that should have killed him 3 times over. But he was still conscious, still thinking, still planning. When our medical team examined him, they found that his body had somehow adapted to conditions that would have been fatal to any other known species. Gresh broke the silence with a trembling voice. What happened to him? To Marcus. Vextal's expression grew even darker. That's where the story becomes truly terrifying. Marcus Chen didn't just survive, he thrived. His injuries healed at an impossible rate. His mind processed the trauma as if it were merely another problem to solve. Within days, he was back on his feet, studying our technology, learning our languages, making friends among the guards and prisoners alike. The old supervisor stood slowly, his movement catching the attention of every being in the cantina. Human had saved us all, but he had also demonstrated something that kept me awake at night. He had shown us what humans are truly capable of when they decide to act. The story continued, describing the days that followed the asteroid crisis. Marcus Chen had become something of a legend among the station's population, but more importantly, he had changed the fundamental dynamic between captors and prisoners. The human didn't demand freedom or special treatment, Vextol explained. He simply continued to work, to help, to solve problems that others couldn't. But his presence had awakened something in the other prisoners. They began to see themselves not as victims, but as beings capable of extraordinary things. The transformation of the station was subtle but profound. Productivity increased not through fear or coercion, but through genuine cooperation. Problems that had plagued the facility for cycles were solved through collaborative effort. The traditional hierarchy began to blur as beings recognized talent and wisdom regardless of species or status. I realized, Vextol admitted, that we had been fundamentally wrong about humans. They weren't just another species to be catalogued and controlled. They were something else entirely, something that didn't fit our understanding of how the galaxy worked. The old HFY's voice grew heavy with foreboding. Marcus Chen was eventually transferred to another facility, as per standard protocol, but the damage was done. The other prisoners had seen what was possible, and they carried that knowledge with them. Reports began to filter in from across the sector, prisoner uprisings, impossible escapes, acts of defiance that defied explanation. The crowd shifted uneasily, beginning to understand the scope of what they were hearing. It wasn't rebellion in the traditional sense, Vextol continued. It was something far more dangerous. It was hope. Hope that even the most desperate situation could be overcome through determination and ingenuity. Hope that the impossible was merely improbable. Hope that any being, regardless of their circumstances, could change their fate. The story reached its final, chilling conclusion as Vextol described his last encounter with Marcus Chen. The human had been scheduled for transfer to a maximum security facility, but he had requested a private meeting with the station supervisor. He thanked me, Vextol recalled, his voice barely above a whisper. This being who had saved all our lives, who had been treated as a prisoner and a slave, thanked me for the opportunity to prove himself. But then he said something that still makes my blood run cold. The cantina fell silent, except for the sound of breathing and the soft hum of environmental systems. Marcus looked me in the eye and said, "We're coming, Vextol. Not as conquerors or destroyers, but as partners. Humanity is spreading across the galaxy, and we're going to change everything. Not through force, but through example. And when we do, you'll understand why every species that has ever encountered us has either become our greatest allies or our most terrified enemies." Vextol sat back down, his story complete, but his burden far from lifted. That was 17 cycles ago. Since then, I've heard reports from across the galaxy. Humans establishing colonies, forming alliances, solving problems that had plagued entire civilizations. But also reports of species that have encountered them and been forever changed by the experience. The old HFY's eyes swept across the assembled crowd, taking in their stunned expressions. You ask me about humans, and I've told you what I know. They're not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the most technologically advanced, but they possess something that makes them the most dangerous beings in the galaxy: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. He stood once more, preparing to leave them with his final warning. If you ever encounter a human, remember this story. Remember that they will sacrifice everything for their principles, endure any hardship for their goals, and never, ever give up on what they believe is right. They will inspire you to be better than you thought possible, or they will destroy everything you thought you knew about the universe. Vextal made his way toward the exit, pausing only to deliver his final words. I met a human once, and he changed my life forever. He showed me that the impossible is just another word for not yet accomplished. Pray you never meet one, because once you do, you'll never be the same. The cantina remained silent long after the old Kethva had disappeared into the corridor. The assembled beings sat in contemplation, processing the implications of what they had heard. Outside, the stars seemed different somehow, as if hiding secrets about creatures that refused to accept the word impossible. In the days that followed, the story spread throughout the station and beyond. Some dismissed it as an old supervisor's exaggerated tale, but others began to pay closer attention to the reports filtering in from the outer rim. Reports of a species that was spreading across the galaxy not through conquest, but through example. Humanity was coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. Asterisk.